All right, everyone. So today we are taking a look at our third biomolecule. Still working through the same lesson piece by piece. Today we are going to be looking at lipids or fats. So first, let's talk about where they come from. So when we're talking about fats, you might have heard good fats, bad fats, saturated fats, unsaturated fats, all of those terms being thrown around maybe when you're reading about diet or exercise, healthy eating. So basically, we can get fats from a lot of different sources, namely fatty foods, fried foods, fast foods, but a lot of foods that are very helpful for us and give us good fats that we need in our body can come from avocados, olive oil, nuts, seeds, fish, all that good stuff. So we're going to talk about the difference between these two types of fats and other ways that the body uses lipids. So what are they used for? Lipids, in and of themselves, their main role is long-term energy storage. So whereas carbohydrates can give us those quicker bursts of energy, once we burn up the carbohydrates in our body, that's when we start to burn the lipids that are again stored in our body to provide that more long-term energy storage. So lipids are also used to help regulate the movement of molecules in and out of cell membranes. So you may remember from prior biology courses that the cell membrane is made of something that's called a phospholipid bilayer. And that name you may have heard before, but perhaps hadn't understood what the word phospholipid means. So we'll talk through that as well. Lipids are also used as protective coatings, both for plants and animals, and a lot of our hormones are also made from lipids. So what are they made of? Lipids are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. But if you take a look at these two examples of lipids, these are two fatty acids, compared to the amount of oxygen they have, just two atoms, they're mostly carbon and hydrogen, these long chains. So the fact that they have more carbon and hydrogen atoms actually allows them to store more energy in those bonds. And these molecules are non-polar. So you may remember when we were talking about water in past chapters and the properties of water, a big property of water is that it is polar. So since these are non-polar, they will not mix. They're not like, so they don't like to be near water molecules. They repel it. So the monomer, or the small building block of a lipid, is a fatty acid. And fatty acids have two characteristics. One is, here in purple, they have a carboxyl group. The carbon double bonded to an oxygen and then single bonded to an OH group. So this may remind you of some functional groups in past lessons. And it kind of looks similar to the ending of water, H2O. So this end of the fatty acid is called hydrophilic. So it is a hydrophile. It likes water. It wants to be near water. But the other side of the fatty acid is hydrophobic. It is a hydrocarbon chain, which literally means a chain of carbon and hydrogen. And it's hydrophobic. Think of like a phobia or a fear. It repels water. It doesn't want to be around water. So we have a little polar end here and a very long nonpolar end here. When we're talking about the complex molecules of lipids, there's a few different molecules that we need to talk about. So it's not like in the other molecules where we had one monomer and more or less one polymer. We've got a few different variations to go over. So the first complex molecule on the list is called a triglyceride. Now, your family members, or perhaps you, when you go to the doctor and you get your blood test, they usually tell you the level of triglycerides in your system. And that's usually an indication of your diet, your overall health, and mainly how much fat you're consuming in your diet. So triglycerides are lipids that are found in your blood. And again, when you get your blood tested, you want to have low levels of triglycerides. High levels of triglycerides can lead to heart problems and other diseases. So definitely want to keep those in control. A triglyceride is made of 3 fatty acids attached to a glycerol or an alcohol. So imagine 3 fatty acids like these guys attached to an alcohol. Saturated triglycerides or saturated fats are usually what some dietitians refer to as bad fats. Things like butter, fried food, red meat. These carbon atoms are called saturated because they're full. So take a look over here. This is an example of a saturated triglyceride. Every carbon has all of its bonds filled with hydrogen, or it's connected to another carbon. So all 4 points, full. That means saturated. So when we're talking about, again, these heavy oils, butter, meats, their fats, their lipids, they look like this. They're saturated. When we talk about unsaturated triglycerides, these are like our good fats, the fats that we want to have in our diet, or more so. So unsaturated triglycerides are seeds, avocados, olive oil, and they're unsaturated because look over here. Some of the carbons are full, and some of them are not. We've got some empty spaces here that don't have hydrogens. The carbon atom still is making its 4 bonds, so it's happy, but it doesn't have those extra hydrogens here. So when we look at the molecular level, that is what unsaturated means. So those are 2 examples of our triglycerides, saturated and unsaturated. Another complex molecule is called a phospholipid. So this is part of the cell membrane. So in the cell membranes of all of your cells, we have what's called a phospholipid bilayer. Bilayer means two layers. So the phospholipid molecules are these guys. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all lined up. And this, imagine, is inside the cell, and this side is outside the cell. So these phospholipid molecules have 2 parts. The head, or the top of the phospholipid, is hydrophilic. So think hydrophile, it loves water. The tail of the molecule is hydrophobic. It does not like water. And the way that this helps with our cells is in the regulation of water moving in and out of the cell. So imagine if water needs to move out of the cell, the head of the phospholipid kind of attracts the water and brings it to the cell membrane. Once the water passes through, the tails don't want it to be there, so they kind of repel it out the side to the other head that attracts it. So think of these as kind of pulling and pushing the water in and out of the cell. And these phospholipids are made of 2 fatty acids attached to a glycerol and a phosphate group. So that's where that phospholipids name comes in, is from that phosphate group. And again, this helps the bilayer to be selectively permeable, which means it lets some molecules in and out of the cell like water, but other molecules it does not allow in or out of the cell. Next, we have waxes. So waxes are long chains of fatty acids connect to a long alcohol chain. And waxes help to make things waterproof. For example, in plants, this can be very helpful so that the leaves aren't damaged by too much water building up there. But also in animals, think about your earwax. So earwax is actually a way to prevent pathogens, bacteria, and viruses from getting into your body through your ears by providing a sticky substance for them to stick to. So that is the benefit of earwax as a protective coating for humans. So it's a quick note on waxes. And last, we have steroids. So steroids are a little bit different because they are not made of fatty acids. So they're the lipids that are still part of this lipid group, but their monomers, their smaller building blocks, are not fatty acids. They're actually these carbon rings. So every time you see a hexagon like this, or even here with 5 sides, pentagon, this is called a carbon ring, a carbon ring. So even though there's no C's here, just imagine like carbon, carbon, carbon. Every time you see a corner, there's a carbon. So some examples of these steroids are testosterone or cholesterol. Those are both examples of steroids that are in the body, and again, made of lipids. Another note here is that we can also create in a lab something called anabolic steroids. So these are synthetic, they're man-made steroids that you may have heard of athletes and other individuals taking them to increase their muscle mass. But in terms of the effects on the body, taking these anabolic steroids can lead to kidney damage, aggressiveness, acne, cancer of the adrenal glands, a whole lot of nasty stuff. So you might get the benefit of the larger muscle mass, but it can definitely come as a result, some negative impacts on the body. So that is our review of lipids for today, and thank you all for listening.